Okay, so we're continuing this thread. What I would think is, well, if we make it to the passage that has the message to Thyatira tonight, and it alludes to the deep things of Satan, I think we're beginning to learn exactly what he's referring to when he talks about the deep things of Satan, because we are looking at the different manifestations of the dragon. We've been looking at the land-based dragon, or the serpent. We've been looking at the crocodile of the Nile, or the dragon of the Nile, the Tanin. We also saw how in the wilderness there could be seraphim, there could be fiery serpents, and we know that those have a heavenly abode. So they would have to have descended in order to have bitten the Israelites in the wilderness. So we can see this dragon concept spans from the water to the land, even up into the heavens, up into the air. And so we're working little by little to make sure that what we're acquiring is pretty sound. We don't want to get into too much speculation, because I think you can get all crossways, and then it's not fruitful. And I don't know about you guys, but I have done prophecy studies before with people, and at the end of the study, I didn't really feel like I had changed. I just knew more. And if that's all it is, if we just know more, then the risk of that is in learning about the dragon, we become like the dragon. Because remember, his problem is his pride. The problem with Leviathan is his pride. And his pride is going to have to be destroyed. Well, we also know that with human beings, when we acquire knowledge, when we acquire information and we see it as something that makes us smarter than someone else, or better than someone else, or we begin to use it in a competitive way, or we begin to derive our self-worth from it, then we are in danger of becoming, I think one of the English translations says, puffed up. And that's what pride does. It puffs up. It's like chametz. And so tonight I want to show you the difference between the chametz that we talk about at Pesach, the chametz that's going to be okay at Shavuot, and the chametz that's going to be okay at Sukkot. There's a distinguishing characteristic to it there. But that's what I do want to be careful. I don't want to go too fast just to acquire more information about the dynamics between the dragon and the beast and how they fit into the Torah portions. But if there's something that's not changing us in knowing it, what's the use of knowing it if it's not having a positive effect on our lives or in the lives of other people? If this doesn't give us more peace, if this doesn't give us more stability, if this doesn't give us more grace to give others, then we're not accomplishing the purpose. We're misusing it. We're misusing the information. So that's my caution. And that's why I want to go really slow, and I don't mind repeating myself. You'll notice that tonight I'm repeating some slides, because each week we do have, typically 2 to 5 new people who might be in class or listening to the recording, and I want to give them something to grab onto. I want to give them some floaties or something, even as we're pulling them into the deep end of the pool. And they can always go back, I know, in the YouTube private channel, and they can catch up to us. But I want to deal with tonight. I know in years past, we've done a lot of work on what happened at Sinai and the nature of the thunder and the lightning and the mountain and the clouds and the smoke and how they could see the voice, and how each of these items is mirrored in the book of Revelation. And you know what, you can go back in the archives. You can pull that stuff out and watch it or read it, whatever you want to do. I just want to focus on maybe a couple of verses tonight. Primarily the one that says he brought us out on eagle's wings. Because what I'm hoping is that as we work through the portion each week, that what you're seeing is we're usually dealing with intersections. Sometimes I call them words in the hood. If the same words in this location appear again over here in this other neighborhood, and then they might appear again over in this neighborhood, then I call them words in the hood. These are intersections of the text, and they're helping to explain one another. And so that's what I want to do tonight, is look at a couple of those intersections. And so here's your memory book. Let's see, I think there's one more page. Here it is. This is for Yitro. And my sentence is that Yitro joined Moses because he heard of the miracles in Egypt. And after they left Egypt, the Israelites were summoned to receive the 10 words at Mount Sinai. So I did manage to get that one into one sentence. And that's what we're doing. We're looking for these intersections. And so this one here, if you've done workbook 2, this should look familiar to you. But this is what I want to work with tonight, is this intersection and maybe one other. So in Exodus 19, 3-6, Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain, saying, "Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob, and tell the sons of Israel, you yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now then, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be my own possession among all the peoples, for all the earth is mine. And you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the sons of Israel." So that's a dense passage in Exodus 19. It's extremely dense in terms of information. And it's recalling, he says, I want you to remember what you saw happen to the Egyptians. That's going to be something that you need to keep in your consciousness going forward. You can compare what happened to the Egyptians with how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. And now that I have brought you to myself here at Sinai, what you're going to have to remember is to indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant. That's the deal. And if we can constantly remind ourselves of what he did to the Egyptians, if we can constantly remind ourselves that he has conquered death on our behalf, and he has earned our release from death, from Egypt, then I think it becomes easier to obey his voice and keep his covenant. And if we can do that, then we become distinguished as a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. And so I want to show, not just from Revelation, but I want to show some examples of this in action. What would it look like in real life if we were to apply this today? We said, okay, I've been called out. Yeshua has saved me from death. He saved me from Pharaoh. He saved me from Egypt. How do I become this kingdom of priests, this treasured possession, a holy nation? And what we're going to see is the problems that they had thousands of years ago are the same problems that we have today. At any rate, I'm going to show you this intersection with Revelation 12, 13, and 14. Because the key text here is he says, I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. I brought you to the Torah. I brought you to Mount Sinai. I made you to not only hear my voice, but you saw the sounds. That was one of the lessons we did a couple of years back. They saw the sounds. And so in Revelation 12:13, it says, and when the dragon saw that he was thrown down to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. Now, this particular insight that John has can span all the way from the time of Moses Pharaoh, not just the Pharaoh that chased him out of Egypt, but the Pharaoh who tried to kill him when he was a child. And this can span even into the last generation, I believe. In fact, I think it actually applies to every generation, just in some respect, because we all have to be taken to the wilderness. We all have to learn the wilderness lessons the same way that Yeshua did. And if we don't learn the wilderness lesson, we're going to have a tough time crossing over. That's the bottom line of the message. But at any rate, we see this intersection. The dragon sees that he's thrown down to the earth. And what John sees is the dragon being thrown down. In the time of the Pharaoh that pursues the Israelites, he is the one who claims to be the king of the Nile. In fact, in one warning, Moses is told to go out to Pharaoh while he's at the river. And that's what they did. The pharaohs claimed to be divine, and so they didn't want the rest of the world to know that they had the same body functions as everybody else. So in the morning, they would, on a pretty regular schedule, apparently, go down to the Nile and conceal themselves in the water so that people wouldn't think that they, went to the bathroom like we do. And Moses goes in and confronts him in this place, as if to say, hey, we're on to you. You're just a human being like everyone else. You can use the outhouse like everybody else. Pharaoh, you're not fooling, the God of the Israelites. Moses says, you're not fooling me. I'm going to call you out right here. But this particular dragon would have been drawn up out of the Nile. But the one that John's seeing is going to be one that is thrown down to the earth. So we can see the serpent being driven out. We want to go back to that particular phrase, driven out from two different realms. So he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. We could say, okay, Israel gave birth to Moses. And so, for a while, Moses is protected. Then Moses goes and camps out with Yitro. And in the meantime, Israel is the one who's being persecuted. But as we apply that prophecy to different time zones, we can see that it spans even beyond that, because we can take it up to the time of Yeshua. We can take it even up to the modern time. But here's the key. When the dragon is pursuing, whether the dragon is thrown down, whether the dragon is fished out of the Nile, whether it's Leviathan who's going to be drawn out of the sea, whether it's a land-based serpent, it doesn't really matter. Because here's what happens. It says, but the two wings of the great eagle were given to the woman so that she could fly into the wilderness to her place, where she was nourished for a time and times and half a time from the presence of the serpent. And so we can see that being brought into the wilderness there is not just a place of protection, it's a place of nourishment. It's going to be where the manna falls. And we know this is no ordinary bread. This is going to be the bread of heaven. So it's really a transition period between Egypt, or death, destruction, and being elevated into the promised land, which represents ultimately being elevated back into the garden. And so the wilderness, even though the looks of it is pretty grim, It looks like there should be no food. It looks like there should be no water. It looks like your clothes and your sandals should wear out pretty fast. The exact opposite is true. There will be food every day. There will be water every day. Your clothes won't wear out and your shoes won't wear out. So it is a place of nourishment where he brings you to himself, because the wilderness has to accomplish something in us before we can cross into the promised land. Something that's very important. And it can only be accomplished in the wilderness. He brings us to himself in the wilderness. I know we all want to, fast track that plan, but it doesn't seem like there is one. So let's go back to the kingdoms of the beast, just as a review. We know that King Nebuchadnezzar II had this dream of the image with 4 different types of metal and then the mingled iron and clay feet. And each of those metals in the image of the beast represent a separate kingdom. The golden head was Babylon. He saw himself as the golden head. He saw into the future. He saw the silver arms of Persia and Media. He saw the bronze abdomen of Greece. He saw the iron legs of Rome. And then he saw the mingled iron and clay feet and toes of Rome, which extend into today's time period, what we would call probably the daughters of Rome. Things that developed out of not only the Roman Empire, but also the Holy Roman Empire. And so there are really 2 major powers even today, but they mingle, but they will never marry. That's the way the scripture reads. And so once Daniel tells King Nebuchadnezzar the interpretation of the dream, and he realizes that the rock that is going to be cut out without hands is going to destroy every one of those kingdoms in a moment. In one moment, every one of those kingdoms from Babylon until the present day, Messiah will destroy them all. And so Nebuchadnezzar tries an end around, and instead he constructs an image of himself, but this time he makes the whole thing of gold and brings representatives from all the nations in to bow down to his golden image, including Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who were nobles of Judah. Somehow the mindset was, well, that's the prophecy, but maybe I can get around it. If I can dupe the nations as well as these nobles of Judah into bowing down to my golden image, then the entire image will be gold. My kingdom will last forever. And that's the mindset of the beast. So what we've looked at the last couple weeks is how it was Pharaoh Necho, who spawned this golden image of the beast, which was Nebuchadnezzar II. Pharaoh was lured out of the Nile. Remember, he's a water creature. He's lured all the way to the river Euphrates to wage war. And Nebuchadnezzar just beats the brakes off of him and sends him running back to Egypt. And then eventually Nebuchadnezzar follows him to Egypt and beats the brakes off of him again in Egypt. So his power began to decline. Pharaoh's power began to decline at the moment that he pretty much passed on that power, the throne, the authority to Nebuchadnezzar II, which is the golden head, the first beast kingdom. Okay, and remember, I think we said this a couple weeks ago, the reason Assyria does not appear in this is, just remember, Assyria could never conquer Jerusalem. The army was destroyed while it was at her gates, and it just began to decline. And this, when we also see Babylon arising. But here's the thing. We know that it was Pharaoh Necho who passed along the power to Babylon. And we saw that attempt by Babylon, by Nebuchadnezzar, to extend the golden head all the way into the iron legs of Rome and the last foot kingdoms, which we're in today. And we're given the definite dimensions of the beast, this image that he made of himself. And so if we see the power and authority as being passed off from Pharaoh Necho to Nebuchadnezzar, from the dragon to the beast, then what we're to understand about Egypt was always the power of their chariots. They were known for their horses and their chariots, so much so that Pharaoh did go to Pharaoh Shishak and buy a bunch of horses. He wants to have the chariots. And even at the Song of the Sea, going back to the Pharaoh in the time of Moses, we are told very specifically that Pharaoh harnesses up 600 chariots to chase after the Hebrews. And that 600 is presented to us as a representative number, it says, of all the chariots of Egypt. And the text implies there was more than this, but we're telling you there were 600 and all the chariots of Egypt. So there's something about this number that is important. We're supposed to remember the number of 600 as it relates to the chariots of the dragon of Pharaoh. And so in the time of Pharaoh Necho, what do we see? Well, we see in his golden image, well, we can go back to Exodus 14, 5 through 9. I didn't remember that I put the text actually up there. It says, so he made his chariot ready and took his people with him. And he took 600 select chariots and all the other chariots of Egypt with officers over all of them. The Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he chased after the sons of Israel as the sons of Israel were going out boldly. Then the Egyptians chased after them with all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh. You see the repetition there. His horsemen and his army, and they overtook them camping by the sea beside Pi Hahirot in front of Baal-Zephon. So this 600 select chariots is a number offered to us as a number that's important as it relates to not only the 600, but all the other chariots of Egypt. All his horsemen, all his army. All right, so fast forward into the time of Pharaoh Necho, because last week we looked at the three causes. What were the three causes for the rise of that last iron kingdom of Rome? Well, out of the three causes, it's Pharaoh who gets inserted in there when he went all the way to the Euphrates and tried to battle Babylon on home territory, on Nebuchadnezzar's home territory. Like I said, Nebuchadnezzar beats the brakes off of him, breaks his arm. And he runs away, and the prophecy against Pharaoh is, I'm going to break your other arm. And so we can see that power transfer right there. And so it's this particular Pharaoh, Pharaoh Necho, who passes off power that is referred to as the second cause as to, the first cause as to why Rome began to ascend. Because Pharaoh takes the daughter. Pharaoh gives his daughter to King Solomon. So the Pharaoh is going to be identified with 600 select chariots. And what is really strange, and we've talked about this before, especially in workbook 2, how out of all these chariots of Egypt, in the Song of the Sea, they're reduced to one chariot. In fact, in the language, it says that when they got into the seabed, that Adonai confused their chariot wheel. singular. It was all these chariots are reduced to one chariot. In the Song of the Sea, it says the horse and the rider, singular, he is thrown into the sea. So the many represent the one. There is one dark chariot that apparently is located in the deep. And it's this counterpart. Just remember a couple weeks ago, we looked at how the gematria of Messiah and the serpent were the same, and the gematria of the beast and Elijah were the same. It seems that for everything that's true and authentic, we have a counterfeit. And so whereas we have a divine chariot above of the four living creatures, the Holy Spirit, we also have something that seems to be much different, a dark spiritual power that is powering these 600 select chariots of Pharaoh. And so it's not just Pharaoh and his army that are being judged. It's this dark force that controls them, that somehow if Adonai lures them into the Sea of Reeds in order to destroy them, then it's more than just Pharaoh and his army. There is another force that is also being judged, a dark force that is also using human beings to rebel against the Holy One. So seeing Pharaoh as iconic of the dragon that is going to give his authority to the beast kingdoms, as we get back into the image of the beast in Daniel 3:1, we're given the dimensions of the image of the beast. Nebuchadnezzar the king, it says, made an image of gold, the height of which was 60 cubits and its width 6 cubits. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. And if you remember, this is where we said Nimrod was located, that he was just building on the work of Nimrod, who was supposed to be the first leader who began to subjugate others to himself. And so Nebuchadnezzar tries to repeat, at least in the same location. And so he builds his self-image, his image of the beast, because remember, he lost his mind and literally became like a beast. So the dimensions are 60 by 6. So if we take the 600 chariots of his father, Pharaoh, and by father we mean like spiritual father. Remember Yeshua saying, you're just like your father, the serpent. He was a liar from the beginning. We're talking about an entity that passes along evil power, evil authority, an evil throne to his descendants. In this case, Pharaoh the dragon, passing it to the beast kingdoms represented by Nebuchadnezzar's self-image. And so in that case, we have an even additional explanation of the 666. I know we've looked at it in like workbook 2 and I think probably workbook 4, because there's different ways of seeing 666. It's a multifaceted number. But if we just take the simple symbolism of the father power of Pharaoh and then the recipient of the father power, which would be the 4 kingdoms of the beast, and the image that represented them, the image of the beast that represented them was 60 by 6. So we've got our 600, our 60, and our 6. Everything's pointing back to Pharaoh and the 4 kingdoms. And I think that's why we're seeing them again, even down to the animals in the book of Revelation. And so just as a refresher, the rise of Rome, the Iron Kingdom, the red one, the last beast kingdom that's not mingled but not married, and the clay and the iron feet. Remember the midrash about that is the angel Michael when King Solomon married Pharaoh Necho's daughter, or the Pharaoh's daughter. The angel Michael, the great prince, descended from the heavens and stuck a great reed into the bottom of the sea. And the mucky moisture of the sea rose from here and from there and ultimately made that place like a forest. And that became the site of Rome. So what the Midrash is telling us is that it's King Solomon and Pharaoh who are responsible for the rise of Rome. Pharaoh would be responsible because remember, the Pharaoh represents the father power of the dragon. Solomon would be responsible because he represents the decline of Israel into idolatry. And that's the principle we learned last week. There is no balance between the two. If Israel is rising, the beast is descending. If Israel is descending, the beast is arising. There's no in between there. So we can't run around and say the devil made me do it. We participate. So Necho was considered like the father dragon, the Tanin, who passed along the throne and the power of Babylon. He spawned the first of the 4 land-based beast kingdoms. But again, through King Solomon, we see that Edom or Rome was also spawned through Israelite disobedience. Both of those things are part of the 3 causes to the rise of Rome. So that's kind of our review from the last couple weeks. So I wanted to, again, remind you of the different names for the dragon. So in Isaiah 27:1, this is a great thing to have marked somewhere or written down because the serpent appears so many different ways. Sometimes we can get confused because we don't know specifically which one is being referred to. And so Isaiah says, in that day, the Lord will punish Leviathan, the fleeing serpent. Okay, Leviathan is called the fleeing serpent, the Nachash. Nachash is land-based. He's one of the beasts of the field. He's described as one of the beasts of the field. With his fierce and great and mighty sword. All right. Leviathan will be destroyed with the sword. That's why we need to know about the wilderness, because the sword and the wilderness have something in common. If this treasured nation is going to cross over into the garden, then the great and mighty sword and the wilderness are both accomplishing the same thing. And we'll get into that. And then he calls him even Leviathan, the twisted serpent, Nachash. And then he calls him by a different name. He says, that's not really a name. It's not a proper noun. It's just a noun. And he will kill the dragon, Hatanin, who lives in the sea. So we have the fleeing serpent, the Nachash, the twisted serpent, Nachash, and then the sea dragon, Hatanin. Pharaoh is called the Tanin because his abode is the Nile. And remember, we said the fleeing serpent in Hebrew, fleeing is barach. Barach, that's the shoresh, the root of it. And it can mean to flee suddenly, but it can also mean to drive away, to drive something away. And I want to show you another place where that word is used, and you'll get an idea again of, okay, this is all nice and good. It's a lot of prophecy, but how does it affect me today? I'm going to show you how it affects you today. And just remember too, one of the meanings of barach, it can mean to pierce through something. And so some translations might call him Leviathan, the piercing serpent, which would make us think of the Sea of Reeds and what we've been saying about the prophecy that warns Judah, or actually warns Pharaoh, that the kings of Judah have leaned upon him like a reed, And when they have leaned upon him, then the reed is broken and pierced them. So he is a piercing serpent, a fleeing serpent, but he's also a driven away serpent. Obviously, the king of Babylon made him to be driven away. He fled suddenly. So let's go to another use of barach as driving someone away. And this is from Nehemiah 13:27. And remember, this is when the Jews come back and they start trying to rebuild Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. And Nehemiah hears that some of the nobles of Judah have been intermarrying with idolatrous women. And so he asks, do we then hear about you that you have committed all this great evil by acting unfaithfully against our God by marrying foreign women? See, in Nehemiah's mind, he's got the picture. He sees the connection. Solomon married Pharaoh's daughter, an idolatrous woman, and that began the decline of Israel spiritually. And now he's seeing that the Pharaoh, Necho, has given his power to the first beast, to Nebuchadnezzar. And so now they've been under the Babylonians, they've been under the Persians, they've been under the Medes. And now they have this opportunity to rebuild their temple, having suffered through 3 beast kingdoms. And they come back to the land, and here are the nobles of Judah doing the exact thing that sent them to Babylon, into the beast kingdoms. So it says, even one of the sons of Joiada, the son of Eliashib, the high priest, was a son-in-law of Sanballat, the Horonite. So I drove him away from me. And I put the Hebrew in there so you could see the shoresh, you could see the root of barach. When he says, I drove him away from me, it's va'avri chehu. He says, remember them, oh my God, because they have defiled the priesthood. What were they told when he reminded them, I brought you on eagle's wings? I brought you to me to be a kingdom of priests. And so now we're getting a very specific example. They have defiled the priesthood and the covenant of the priesthood and the Levites. Thus I purified them from everything foreign and appointed duties for the priests and the Levites, each in his task. And I arranged for the supply of wood at appointed times and for the first fruits. Remember me, O my God, for good. So Nehemiah recognizes this is a time of return, and it's not the time to be casual with the word, because you'll end right back up in a beast kingdom. Which, Greece was on the way soon. But he's saying, look, you can't go back to the same sins of our fathers that got us put under the system of the beast. So he says, you know what? I'm going to drive you away from me. I'm just going to drive you away. You're going to be like the fleeing serpent, because now you are behaving like your father Pharaoh. You're behaving like your father the dragon. You're behaving like your father the serpent. You're intermarrying with idolatrous women. And so I have to purify this nation. I have to purge this nation of people like you who don't know how to make a distinction. Because marrying the foreign women also affected the northern tribes of Israel, and they hadn't returned. Very few in number remained in the land. And so to this day, they're considered lost or concealed among the nations. And so Nehemiah doesn't want this to happen to the Jews. He doesn't want them to lose their identity among the nations. So he says, I have to drive away the dragon spawn, people who were intermarrying with foreign wives, because it's defiling the priesthood. So as it applies to us, we may not be priests by lineage, but we are priests, I think, by our character as we cling to the covenant, which was the condition when he says, remember how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. So now you're going to have to hear my voice, obey my voice, and do my covenant. And if you do this, you'll be a kingdom of priests. So this is the model. If we are coming back, now don't leave here and say, I told everybody to go get a divorce. That's not what we're saying. We're looking at this as a model, because ultimately marrying the foreign wives was simply a symptom of idolatry. There was a root of idolatry. Now, had they literally gone out and worshiped an idol yet or burned incense to it? Maybe not. But Moses has warned them about, or he will warn them when we get to that Torah portion, where he says, beware that there's not a bitter root among you, where it's like something deep down inside of you where it's saying, you know, you can do anything you want to do. There's no consequences for it. And so marrying an idolatrous wife, that's spiritual adultery. You've already left your husband at that point. And so in our context here, he says, what I need to do is drive away the seed of the serpent. I need to purify the priesthood from everything foreign. I need to give them a job. And then he brings up the appointed times and the first fruits. In other words, prepare the holy altar in Jerusalem. Jerusalem is the focal point of the feasts. We need to restore the appointed times and the appointed place of the feasts so that people can bring in their first fruits. Because ultimately, as we get more into the book of Revelation, we'll realize that 144,000 is simply a first fruits. They're just representing the great numbers of those who are just like them. Those aren't the only ones. They are a representative number of first fruits that have been restored, that the work of Nehemiah has gone forth. And so if you say, how can I apply this in my world? Well, I have to look for areas in my life where I might be committing spiritual adultery. In those places where I'm not obeying the voice and keeping his covenant, it may be because I'm holding on to the foreign women. I'm holding on to the Jezebel because there is an economic benefit to me, because there is a political benefit to me, because there is a comfort benefit to me, because there is more than anything else a pride benefit to me. But if we want to restore the appointed times in the first fruits, then we have to get rid of the idols, because they will definitely damage our spiritual hearing. So as it, at least in this example, as it pertained to Judah, it was characterized by holy people, especially holy leaders who had intermarried with idolatrous foreign wives. And all this does, it's the age-old problem of assimilation. If we assimilate, we obscure the difference between what is holy and the covenant and what is unclean in the surrounding nations. And eventually you just lose your identity. And by intermarrying with the idolatrous wives, it was allowing the dragon, the realm of the unclean, the serpent, to pierce through the board. Remember the example we had of Barak was to pierce a board, the way the board was pierced in the tabernacle. So it kind of allows the serpent to pierce into the holy realm. And that's why it's significant that Leviathan is sometimes translated as the piercing serpent. He likes to pierce through and get into realms that are holy and not his. He likes to wriggle and slither into clean places so that he can contaminate it with unclean things. And so I think that's exactly what happened in the garden, why we should be on our guard. So, like I said, in his context, Nehemiah mentions arranging the wood to be supplied to the altar at the appointed times. And we learned that the first moed was going to be Pesach in the Torah portion bow. And then he mentions the first fruits offerings, and the first of these is going to always fall in Pesach at the beginning of the months in Nisan. And so what he's doing is helping the reader focus on the necessity of removing uncleanness in our lives, removing spiritual adultery from our lives, idolatry, before we go and rekindle the fires of the feast in the temple. Before we return the first fruits to the temple, there's going to have to be some serious purging going on. And this is one of the functions of the interim time in the wilderness, to help purge a lot of junk out of us that we may not even know is there. We might think it's okay, like, okay, well, Nehemiah, you're really all been out about, but that was back at the first temple. The first temple was destroyed. That's Old Testament stuff, Nehemiah. Now we're building the second temple. You need to lighten up a little. It doesn't matter who we marry because, well, exactly. And if there's going to be a third temple, we can't tell Nehemiah or anyone else to lighten up, because it's going to have to be a place that meets the criteria of holiness as Ezekiel describes it, in order for us to rekindle the fires of the feast in the temple and return those first fruits to the temple, for there even to be 144,000 who have not contaminated themselves with spiritual adultery. They've not followed after the Jezebel. So Ezra is going to also tell us about this, but lest we think that there should be no intermarriage, because that passage of scripture has been mutilated so many times, racially twisted to make a point that's actually racist. To show you that it's not racist to purge yourself of foreign wives. The context of it is foreign idolatrous wives. That's the key, because Ruth was a foreign wife. So Ezra gives us a better footing here to understand what had to happen. In Ezra 6:19 through 22, we're talking about in general the same time period. It says, the exiles observed the Passover on the 14th day of the first month. What Nehemiah had to prepare for, getting the wood for the altar and preparing for the first fruits. Okay, now it says the exiles who had come back from Babylon observed the Passover on the 14th of the first month. For the priests and the Levites had purified themselves together. All of them were pure. Okay, now we're making some progress. Then they slaughtered the Passover lamb for all the exiles, both for their brothers, the priests, and for themselves, because apparently the common person was in such a state of tameh, or ritual impurity, that they couldn't even slaughter their own lambs, which you're supposed to do. But the priests and the Levites had gotten their act together by this point. They had put away the foreign wives, the idolatrous wives. And here's what's important. It says the sons of Israel who returned from exile, and all those who had separated themselves from the impurity of the nations of the land, to join them, to seek the Lord God of Israel, ate the Passover. And they observed the Feast of Unleavened Bread 7 days with joy, for the Lord had caused them to rejoice and had turned the heart of the king of Assyria toward them to encourage them in the work of the house of God, the God of Israel. So you can see what I put in bold print there, that it wasn't by lineage that you ate the Passover. It was by what you had separated from in order, well, guys, in order to attach yourself to that which was clean. So it says they had separated themselves from the impurity of the nations of the land to join them, right? So you've got two kinds of people. You have the sons of Israel who returned from exile, and all those who had separated themselves from the impurity of the nations of the land to join them to seek the Lord God of Israel. They ate the Passover together. So just by virtue of somebody being from a foreign country or another race does not disqualify them from eating the Passover. In the same way that the Israelites returned from exile and ate the Passover, there was also peoples among them who had separated themselves from the impurities, from the idolatries, the spiritual adultery, and they were able to eat it together. And so the idea here is, if you were one of those people, you don't hear the word convert in the Tanakh, but that's essentially what they had done. They had left their many gods and they had clung to the one. They now believe that the God of Israel is exclusively their God and there is none other. And that qualified them to eat the Passover, which I'm sure at that point in history too, they were also circumcised. So you can see anytime you return to the land, it's an ongoing process. It takes a long time to go through the reforms necessary. So that's why I ask you, don't judge modern Israel too harshly. They're a very young nation. If we compare it to the time it took Ezra and Nehemiah and Zechariah and Haggai, the men of the Great Assembly, if you look at how long it took them to establish even the second temple, which was not perfect, then you have to relent a little bit and allow them a lot of grace for the changes that they need to make in order to prepare for Messiah. So again, we saw the gematria 358 was the same for Messiah and the serpent. Then we saw Elijah, his gematria Eliyahu is 52, the same as Behemah, the beast. So we can see them, the serpent and the beast. And remember, the serpent gives the beast his authority, and it's the same way in Revelation. They are going to mimic the two witnesses of Mashiach. Remember, Elijah functions under the authority of Mashiach. Elijah is specifically associated with the feast of Pesach, Passover. And it's understood that Elijah will herald the coming Messiah. And as the lost tribes return, it's going to be his job to sort through them and assign them places. But, we drink the 4 cups of wine at Pesach, but there's this 5th cup that sits out on the table that nobody drinks. That's called Elijah's cup, and it's a cup of wrath. And that cup of wrath is reserved for the serpent and the beast. So it's mind-bending to think that Elijah and Messiah might have the same gematria as the beast and the dragon. But it doesn't have to be. Because remember, there's a principle of the contronym in Hebrew. If you're obeying the word, then you're living on the life side of the word. If you disobey the word, now you're living on the death side of the word. There's nothing in between in Hebrew. It's either obedience or disobedience. If you're disobeying, you're in a place of death. That's just the law of the universe. So think of the contronym of chametz, which is leaven. At Pesach, at Passover, leaven or chametz, bad. You want to get the leaven out of your house. At Pesach, you're trying to get rid of the leaven of the serpent. You don't want pride in your house. Remember his downfall, Leviathan's downfall is his pride. And so at Pesach, chametz is bad. It's sour, something sour. Chamutzim in Hebrew today is pickles because they're sour. You don't want your spiritual life to be sour at Pesach. But there's a transition in the counting of the weeks. As you go into Shavuot, the Feast of the Weeks, all of a sudden there's a different kind of leaven. It's a different kind of chametz. And so by Shavuot, you're going to offer the 2 leavened loaves at Shavuot, which is the time of the giving of the Torah. And Yeshua talks about the leaven of the kingdom. It's a good thing. Matthew 13:33. It's a good thing to be part of the leaven of the kingdom. So it's contrasting the chametz of the serpent versus the chametz of the kingdom. At Pesach, it's teaching you to get rid of the leaven of the serpent, get rid of pride. But by Shavuot, and especially Sukkot, it's teaching you about the chametz of the kingdom. And presumably, if you've done your job at Passover, getting rid of the dragon pride, the serpent pride, then you understand the humility that is required to be part of the leaven of the kingdom. And so in this Torah portion, Yitro, you have the giving of the Torah. And that's what's going to stand between the Israelites, Shavuot, the giving of the Torah, the covenant, obey my voice. That's what's going to stand between the chametz of the dragon at Pesach and the chametz of the kingdom at Sukkot. In fact, Shavuot is the 4th feast. The giving of the Torah is the 4th feast. And it's with the Torah, the testimony. That's the weapon with which we defeat the 4 kingdoms of the beast. So we remove the dragon's leaven and we leave only the leaven of the kingdom in our houses. And so I just went ahead and for those of you who aren't familiar with Elijah's cup, if you've never done a traditional Passover Seder, then I just pulled this out of Encyclopedia Britannica, which gives like a very concise explanation of it. But it's the 5th ceremonial cup of wine. It's left untouched in honor of Elijah, who will arrive one day as a guest to herald the advent of Messiah. Tradition tells us he'll come 3 days before. And so it says during the Seder dinner, biblical verses are read while the door is briefly open to welcome Elijah, who it is said will resolve all controversial questions connected with the law. And I'm like, Baruch Hashem, good grief. But in this way, the Seder dinner not only commemorates the historical redemption from Egyptian bondage, but also calls to mind the future redemption when Elijah and the Messiah shall appear. So remember, the number 3 cause from last week for the rise of the red one of Rome, the 4th beast, the Iron Kingdom, it was said was Elijah's departure from the natural world. This is when the beast was truly spawned. He was built and then fully formed with the continuing spiritual decline of Israel that began with Solomon's Egyptian wife. It was made solid, built up by the grudge among the Israelites, especially the northern kingdom against Judah and Judah against the northern kingdom. And then the beast was crowned. Remember the king in Edom? When Elijah was taken away from the world, remember he had to go anoint a new king. He had to go find his replacement, Elisha. And then it says a king in Edom was crowned. And Elijah's contention with the king of Israel, again, was that he married a foreign wife for the sake of economic security. And she led him into even deeper idolatry than Israel already was in. She murdered a good man for his vineyard. She was part of keeping the northern tribes fractured from Judah and Benjamin. And so when Elijah reappears at Passover for that fifth cup of wrath, those fractures that idolatry caused, that pride caused, that spiritual adultery caused, it's going to be repaired. And Elijah is going to begin to resort those tribes to get them a sign. So this is from Revelation something. I don't know why I didn't have the verse down here. At any rate, it's the church of Thyatira. So this should sound familiar to us. It says, the Son of God, who has eyes like a flame of fire and his feet are like burnished bronze, says this. In other words, his feet aren't going to crumble like Rome's. I know your deeds and your love and faith and service and perseverance, and that your deeds of late are greater than at first. But I have this against you. You tolerate the woman Jezebel. Okay, now you have the history of Jezebel. You understand it's not a single woman in history. It's a continuing pattern of the kings of Israel, both the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. It's all Israel. Whether you're talking about Ahab, whether you're talking about Solomon, whether you're talking about the returning priests and Levites, the nobles coming back from Babylon who were intermarrying with foreign wives who were idolaters. He says, I have this against you. You tolerate the woman Jezebel. You're tolerating this spiritual adultery, who calls herself a prophetess, and she teaches and leads my bondservants astray so that they commit acts of immorality and eat things sacrificed to idols. Right? That's one thing he accomplishes in the wilderness. He purifies our diet with manna. He says, I gave her time to repent. She doesn't want to repent of her immorality. Behold, I'll throw her on a bed of sickness and those who commit adultery with her into great tribulation. If you're doing the same thing right alongside her, spiritual adultery, you'll go into tribulation with her unless they repent of her deeds. And I will kill her children with pestilence. And all the churches will know that I am he who searches the minds and hearts. I will give to each one of you according to your deeds. But I say to you, the rest who are in Thyatira, who do not hold this teaching, who have not known the deep things of Satan as they call them. And I think that's exactly what we've been discussing for the past several weeks now, the deep things of Satan, the father dragon. He says, I place no other burden on you. Nevertheless, what you have, hold fast until I come. He who overcomes and he who keeps my deeds until the end. Remember, in our Torah portion, obey my voice. Obey my voice. It says, to him I will give authority over the nations. This is what the beast seeks. But he seeks it out of pride. He seeks it for himself. That's what the dragon and his beast kingdoms seek, authority over the nations. He says, if you will be humble, if you will do the deed of the wilderness, and I'm going to remind you what that is. If you can learn the lesson of the wilderness, to him I will give authority over the nations, and he shall rule them with a rod of iron. As the vessels of the potter are broken to pieces. Remember the clay feet of Rome? Remember the daughter kingdoms of Rome and the Roman Empire? Okay, those vessels, whatever the containers are of that clay, the clay doctrines, they're going to be broken to pieces with that rod of iron. He says, as I also have received authority from my Father. Yeshua is telling us the proper way to receive authority. It's not through the dragon. It's not through the beast. It's not through worshiping your self-image. It's not through feeling higher and better than others. It's about humility. He says, as I also have received authority from my Father. He earned that authority in a very specific way. He says, I will give him the morning star. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. That's exactly what it says in our Torah portion, Yitro. Obey my voice. So if we want to look again at the pride of Leviathan, and we want to look at iron, the rod, because he says, I'm going to use a rod of iron. Let's go back to Leviticus 26:19. He says, I will also break down your pride of power. I will also make your sky like iron and your earth like bronze. You see the iron and the bronze kingdoms of the beast? That pride has to be broken. And that's exactly what the rock that's cut out without hands will do in one moment. He'll wipe out those kingdoms of pride. And that's what Yeshua's job is. When he returns, he is going to be breaking strongholds of pride. He's going to be cleaning out the dragon spawn. He's going to be cleaning out those who conform to the image of the beast, who are into self-worship. That's what it boils down to. They worship their own will. And that's the inheritance of the serpent and the beast kingdoms, is pride. That's what is passed down from generation to generation. So what he's saying is, I'm not going to be like Pharaoh's reed kingdoms. If you lean on them, they'll break and pierce you. He says, my throne's going to support you. My rod will support you. And if you continue with spiritual adultery, which is repeatedly rebuked by the prophets, especially when we look at Elijah to Ahab and Jezebel, he says, you'll get a plague. You'll definitely get a plague if you continue in spiritual adultery. So if Elijah's the third cause, his departure from the world was the third cause for the rise of the beast, Rome, then we can reverse it. What we're seeing in Revelation when it talks about Yeshua's rod of iron. If Elijah's testimony against Israel is what precedes his departure, then the third cause for the rise of the beast, Rome, we're going to see it decline. Because when Elijah comes back, he's returning as a testimony for Israel. Remember, he had to leave because he slandered them. He was given testimony against them for being a bunch of idol worshipers, which, except for 7,000, they were. But he had to exit after those words. And so if Elijah returns, and if his exit was that last cause that solidified the kingdom of Rome and put a king in Edom, then when Elijah returns, the obverse is true. Now he has become a testimony for Israel. And then we know that the beast has declined, is declining. And what does he do? He reunites the tribes, he sorts them, assigns them their place to go. And that's when the world is going to see, as Israel comes back, that the beast's power depended solely upon Israel's spiritual decline. And when Israel arises to the testimony of Yeshua and the commandments of God, when they return to Jerusalem as the place of the feast and they purify themselves, when they will recognize Judah as the leader in celebrating those feasts, then the work that was begun by Yeshua holding a reed is being fully reversed, and now it's destroying the offspring of Rome. And so what's being accomplished here? We're running out of time. We know Leviathan is both the twisted and the fleeing serpent, the Nachash. And we know the serpent, it said in the verse we read earlier, is going to be punished with the sword of Adonai. We know the sword of the Spirit, it divides asunder soul and spirit, the Nefesh and the Ruach, the soul and the spirit. It's going to rightly divide the voice of the beast from the voice of the man. So Nachash was the Hebrew designation for the serpent who deceived Eve. He introduced spiritual adultery into the garden. So we can see in this message to Thyatira that when she ate the fruit of the tree, it became spiritual adultery. It became food offered to an idol, her self-image. When she and Adam ate the fruit, they were eating to their own self-image, just like you saw with Nebuchadnezzar II. He made an image of himself. So that's the beast, that's the pride of Leviathan. And in the Song of Songs study from last week, you saw how the Shemitah year included the vineyard as one of the trees. So that's where the rabbi said, well, it could have been that the tree in the garden was a vine. And so now we have to use the vine for sanctification purposes to show that it's a point of purification and obeying God's will, as opposed to using it as a point of separation from his will and falling into a state of uncleanness and spiritual adultery. It could just be, like we say, we can be looking at allegories, but it still teaches us a good point. So when Adam and Eve ate the fruit of the tree to become like Elohim, they were that prototype of Israel committing spiritual adultery and immorality. So they were thrown upon a sick bed called death, and their children have suffered pestilence ever since. And so they accepted the rule of pride from the serpent. They became like the beasts of the field, and then of course, they're going to spawn kingdoms of the beasts. And so I don't want to get too much into the 5th day creatures and the 6th day creatures because of time right now, but I did want to show you this. The heads of the serpent. Maybe we can do that next week. We'll finish with this because this is where we started, and I'll just have to remember to back up a little bit next week. The dragon saw that he was thrown down to earth. And so he goes after the woman, but she's given the 2 wings of the great eagle to fly into the wilderness to be nourished for a time and times and half a time from the presence of the serpent. All right, look what Yeshua did. He goes into the wilderness and has to face the presence of the serpent. Yeshua goes 40 days in the wilderness. He's hungry, he's thirsty, and he's going to learn what it's like to be human through the suffering of being human, and yet having to learn the humility that's going to be necessary in order to be able to cross over into the garden. And that humility of the 40 days in the wilderness somehow equipped him and carried him all the way to his death and resurrection. But it also explains this. Well, Matthew 4, 1 through 11, and you can go through this, sometime this week, but look very specifically at these 3 temptations that Yeshua faced in the wilderness. If you're the Son of God, command these stones become bread. But he answered and said, it's written, man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God. Then he takes him to the holy city. has him stand on the pinnacle of the temple. It says, if you're the Son of God, throw yourself down. It's written, he will command his angels concerning you. On their hands they will bear you up so that you will not strike your foot against a stone. Yeshua said, on the other hand, it's written, you shall not put the Lord your God to the test. Exactly what they did in the wilderness. Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said, all these things I will give you if you fall down and worship me. And then Yeshua said to him, go, Satan, for it's written, you shall worship the Lord your God and serve him only. Then the devil left him, and behold, angels came and began to minister to him. At that point, they come and they begin to nourish him. And so you see with these tests in the wilderness, the Father did take them out into the wilderness. He let them get a little hungry to see what they would do. Yeshua's answer to not having the fine meals that he's used to, man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. If I've got my Bible, I've got everything. Tempting him, putting him to the test. Each of these things is part of their wilderness experience so that they can face the sword that's going to separate the soul and the spirit, to let them know which one is in charge of their lives. Because if the red one is in charge of their lives, and that's the nefesh, that's the soul, it's the part of a human being that acts on what I think, I feel, I want. Instead, the spirit functions on it is written. And so the wilderness is there to separate those things, to demonstrate to you whether you're ready to cross over or not. And that's the point. Again, let me try to back up here. I think I went. No, I didn't want to go back. Here it goes. From last week, Deuteronomy 8:3. He humbled you, let you be hungry, and fed you with manna, which you did not know, nor did your fathers know, that he might make you understand that man does not live by bread alone, but man lives by everything that proceeds out of the mouth of the Lord. He humbled you and let you be hungry. That's going into the wilderness. He has to humble you there before he can take you over. Deuteronomy 8:16, in the wilderness he fed you manna, which your fathers did not know, that he might humble you and that he might test you to do good for you in the end. You don't test him, he tests you. It's a test of humility. And then we're told in Joshua 5:12 that on the day they had eaten some of the produce of the land, they no longer had to depend upon the manna, but they were able to eat some of the yield of the land of Canaan during that year. If we want to eat from the garden, we have to learn how to eat the wilderness first. And that's what Torah does. It takes us into the wilderness on a journey of losing control. Moses fasted 40 days and 40 nights on the mountain to receive the Torah, and he had a much different relationship to the covenant than anybody else because it humbled him. They had to relinquish control of bread and water to humble them. And only then could the Father lift them into the land. And we see this in Yeshua. He goes into the wilderness for 40 days to show us this process.
We do.
Because the sword, remember, divides soul and spirit. Sword in Hebrew is cherev, which means to make thirsty. That's exactly what the two cherubim were holding at the entrance to the garden. He has to humble you in the wilderness to make you thirsty in order for you to be able to distinguish the soul and the spirit. And when he has humbled you, then you can get past the cherubim. Then you can go back to the garden. And that's exactly, we can see that at the point that Yeshua passes the test, that no longer is the wilderness a sort of thirst to him, hunger, a test of complaining, raging against losing control. Instead, it's as if he has disarmed the cherubim and now they want to nourish him in the wilderness. And that's what we learn in the wilderness, how to let him nourish us. And to be okay with what he provides. So that's a good place to stop.